honestly, public speaking is absolutely my favorite part of being chapter leader for American Promise here in North Texas. I'd like to introduce my colleague, Beverly Hill. She's here with me. Not only is Beverly one of our prime volunteers in American Promise, she founded her own nonprofit, the Gendercide Awareness Project, and that serves women around the world. You should talk to Beverly about her work. And Beverly and I share a concern about the impact of all this money in politics on the world of philanthropy and the diversion of dollars away from serving human beings into politics. I think that's a real problem. So anyway, I'm excited to give you kind of our basic presentation about money in politics. And then after we do the presentation, we should have plenty of time for some conversation, which is always my favorite part of the program. So let me get started. I am a volunteer with American Promise, which is a national nonpartisan organization committed to restoring the people's voice in government by ending the corrosive influence of big money in politics. Political spending by wealthy special interests is drowning out the voices of ordinary Americans. But the good news is that solving this problem is actually one big project that can unite Americans. That Americans across the political spectrum, Republicans, Democrats, Independents, agree that money in politics is a problem that needs to be solved. And that if we work together to solve this problem, then we actually open up the opportunities for solutions to the real problems that Americans care about and want solved. So what I want to do today is dig into the data and explore the opportunity we have to do historic good for our country. So last year, the Pew Research Center asked Americans to describe their feelings about politics. And these are some of the words they came up with: divisive, corrupt, polarized, chaos, messy, bad. You get the picture. Americans have lost faith in our political process. Now, when we pledge allegiance to a republic. In a direct democracy, everyone goes to the polls and votes on an issue at the same time. But a republic is premised upon a system of representation. And when the founders established a republic, they were doing something revolutionary. It was the first time anyone had set up a system of government based on the idea of popular sovereignty, that the people are the legitimate source of the government's power and authority. And they decided to implement this idea of popular sovereignty through a scheme of representation because they knew the country was going to be too big to do it through direct democracy. So this idea of a republic revolves around the relationship between constituents and their representative. And this is a sacrosanct relationship. But we have evolved a system where non-constituent interests, super PACs, dark money groups, donors from out of the district, out of the state, even out of the country, are competing with constituents for the attention and the vote of the representative. And money is undermining the sacrosanct relationship between citizens and their representatives. And that is undermining the idea of popular sovereignty. And when money undermines this relationship, the needs of constituents are no longer necessarily top of mind for their representatives when they go to vote. And people can see this, and it makes them angry, and they become cynical. And often they become disaffected. They just drop out of the process, reasoning that their participation doesn't matter. So there are many examples of how this plays out, but let's just explore one. So think back to 2004 when Medicare Part D was enacted. The pharmaceutical industry used the power of its political spending to protect its profits on the sale of drugs that are paid for with tax dollars. And this situation persisted until 2022, when Congress finally passed some legislation allowing a limited amount of price negotiation on prescription drugs. But Big Pharma is still using the power of its political spending to protect its profits. And the root cause of Congress's dysfunction on drug prices and many other issues that Americans care about is the grip that money has on our system. And so money's grip on our system has actually now become a threat to democracy. And this is some polling that American Promise just published on its website a couple of days ago. And it asked, do you agree or disagree with the following statement? The influence of money in politics is a threat to our democracy. And you can see that about 82% of the people polled either strongly or somewhat agreed with that statement. There wasn't a whole lot of disagreement about that. And, Americans have good reason to point to the influence of money in politics as a factor, as a threat to democracy. So let's explore some of the data. I'm going to show you some charts, including some data that I just downloaded from the Open Secrets website, which is the website that kind of compiles information about money in politics. So I've got some new data about the current election cycle. So first of all, the federal election cycle in 2024 looks to be the most expensive ever, continuing a trend that every election cycle we spend more and more money in politics. So these are federal races, the presidential and congressional races, and this is combined spending by campaigns and outside groups like super PACs. Now, in nominal dollars, the spending in 2024 has already surpassed the spending in 2020. In inflation-adjusted dollars, Open Secrets says it is yet to be determined whether the spending in 2024 is going to surpass 2020's spending. But we're looking at about $16 billion being spent this cycle, and that does not include state and local races. That's just federal races. So here's the presidential race. Kamala Harris has raised and is spending a lot of money, and that includes the money that was raised by Joe Biden before he dropped out. So the light blue bar, that over $1 billion, that's her campaign. And then the bar on the right, the dark blue bar, creeping up towards $600 million, that's outside groups supporting her campaign. Donald Trump has been less successful in raising money this cycle, he and his the super PACs that support him. Now, the billionaires. Let's talk about the billionaires. There's some brand new data up on Open Secrets, and I'm sorry, these are not the billionaires. That's the next slide. These are the Senate races. I'm sorry. And these are the 10 most expensive Senate races. Now, let me give you a little context. The Georgia Senate race in 2022 was the most expensive Senate race ever, where we saw almost $500 million with a B, dollars spent to elect one senator from a swing state. Now, this is the 2024 Senate races, maybe a little hard to read. Ohio is at the top. The Texas Senate race between Ted Cruz and Colin Allred is number 4, with so far over $200 million spent by the campaigns and the super PACs supporting those two Senate candidates. The Ohio race up there at the top, where Sherrod Brown is defending his seat, is total spent $425 million. So it's inching up towards that Georgia record that was set in 2022. Okay, now let's talk about the billionaires. So these are the top 6. I'm going to show you the top 12 billionaires. This is the first half. And let's see, Timothy Mellon. These are Miriam Adelson, who you know now is the owner of the Mavs. Let's see, who's number 3? This is so hard to read. Hold on a minute. Oh, Richard and Elizabeth Uline are number 3. Kenneth Griffin, Jeff Yass, who you may have read about Jeff Yass getting involved in the Texas Republican primary this year, $6 million to be exact. And then Elon Musk coming in at number 6. And all of these top 6 billionaire donors, every cent has gone to bolster conservative candidates. And then here's the number 7 through 12. Let me look these up too. Sorry, these are so hard to read. Paul Singer. Okay, at number 8, we finally have a Democratic billionaire, Mike Bloomberg. And then Stephen Schwartzman, number 9. Bob Bigelow, number 10. Number 11 is Timothy Dunn. You may recognize that name, West Texas oil and gas billionaire who's also playing heavily in Texas Republican politics, and he's taking his spending nationwide now. And then number 12 is Reid Hoffman, the second Democratic billionaire. So the billionaires, don't get me wrong, both parties have their billionaires. This is not a partisan problem, it's a systemic problem. And the Democratic billionaires play and the Republican billionaires play. I'm just pointing out that this cycle, most of the top billionaires are donating to conservatives. All right, and one of the effects of all this spending by the billionaires, by the concentrated wealthy interests, is that it's pushing down the percentage of total money coming from small dollar donors, people who give $200 or less. So in the 2020 election, that percentage was 22%. But so far this year, small donors are only making up 16% of the total spending. Okay, so what does all this money mean? What is the consequence? The consequence is that it raises the cost for everyone of running for any office. Okay, whether you're running for Congress or state legislature or city council or school district, you have to actually now meet a pretty high threshold of fundraising capacity in order to be taken seriously as a viable candidate. And then you have to spend a whole lot of time raising money. And in fact, the research indicates that members of Congress spend anywhere between 30 and 70% of their time raising money for re-election. And this starts with day one when they arrive in Washington, D.C. to serve their terms. And so this is a model daily schedule. It was published by CBS News a few years ago. That's a suggestion by party leadership to new members of Congress about how they should spend their time each day. And you notice it suggests they spend 4 hours a day in call time. Now, call time is that time they can't spend it in their official congressional office on Capitol Hill because that would be illegal. They have to walk over to a party office and they sit down at a desk with a telephone and a donor list and they dial for dollars, just like a telemarketer. And this is time that they are not spending studying legislation, attending to constituent needs, and building the relationships that will let them get stuff done. So let's talk about dark money, which is the political spending where the source of the money is not disclosed. Let's say you've got a little bit of money that you want to spend on politics, but you don't want it publicly known that you are the source of that spending. So what can you do? Well, you donate it, you transfer it to one of these so-called social welfare nonprofits that are organized under Section 501c4 of the Internal Revenue Code. We call these dark money groups because they are not required to disclose their donors. So let me give you an example of how this works. Let's say we have an ordinary citizen. He's got a little bit of money to spend on politics. So what can he do? Well, he can give to campaigns up to $3,300 per campaign. Those are congressional campaigns, federal campaigns. He can also give a limited amount of money to a traditional political action committee. Most likely that would be his employer's corporate PAC. He can give up to $5,000. Now, Of course, you know that most Americans don't have anywhere near that much money to spend on politics, right? But the point is, there are limits to what he can do. So let's say we've got a Mr. Moneybags who also wants to spend some money in politics. Let's look at what he can do. He can do the same things as our ordinary citizens, subject to the same limits, but he can do so much more. He can give unlimited amounts of money to as many super PACs as he wants to. Now, the super PACs do disclose their donors, but then Mr. Moneybags can give unlimited amounts of money to as many dark money groups as he wants to, and those groups don't have to disclose their donors. And then he can spend his own money. If he wants to buy radio, TV, social media, print ads, he can spend as much money as he wants to. So, you know, it's also worth noting that these avenues of spending that are available to this wealthy citizen are also available to corporations, unions, LLCs, and other artificial entities. So this chart shows how dark money has grown in recent cycles. And there's two things to take away from this. One is that early on, this starts, the bar on the left is 2010, and then you see it starting to grow in 2012. For the first about 3 or 4 cycles, the dark money was primarily benefiting Republicans, and then the tables flipped. And in the last couple of cycles, dark money primarily benefited Democrats. Again, the point is, this is not a partisan problem. This is a systemic problem. Both political parties have learned how to play the dark money game. Dark money is the vehicle through which foreign interests are influencing U.S. elections, spending to influence our elections. Now, you probably know that it is illegal for foreign persons, foreign corporations, foreign governments to donate to U.S. political campaigns. But it is perfectly legal for them to donate to 501c4 dark money groups. Donate as much as they want to. Unlimited donations. And then those groups turn around and funnel that money in very complicated ways into other dark money groups and into super PACs in ways that are designed to obscure the true source and agenda of the money. And then that money is spent to influence U.S. elections. It is a giant loophole that was opened up by the Supreme Court, and it is a national security threat. And people of both political parties are concerned about this. Maine is the focus of the foreign money fight right now. So in a 2023 ballot referendum, Maine voters overwhelmingly, with 86% of the vote, they approved a ballot initiative to prohibit foreign government-owned corporations from spending money to influence Maine politics. This had to do with the spending by corporations in which the Canadian government is a majority shareholder. And so it was overwhelmingly approved at the ballot box. And then those corporations, as well as the media companies that are affected, sued, claiming that the legislation that the voters had just approved violates their First Amendment speech rights. And so we're watching to see how the courts rule on the constitutionality of an effort by Maine voters to keep foreign money out of Maine elections. Maine is also an example of another phenomenon that has grown, and that is money crossing state lines. So you remember when I talked about that Georgia 2022 Senate race? The vast majority of that almost $500 million came from outside of Georgia. And so now think about the 2020 Senate race in Maine when Susan Collins was defending her seat. $200 million was spent to influence that election in this little bitty state that has like 1.3 million people. And what all that out-of-state money, most of that $200 million came from outside of Maine. And what that money did was buy up the radio and TV airtime so that the local Maine candidates couldn't get their message out to their voters. And this is a Republican state senator, David Trahan, who described it as feeling like we were 20 feet under snow in an avalanche and no one could hear us. So how did we get here? It hasn't always been like this. 100 years ago, as a result of corruption in the Gilded Age, Congress and states passed common sense campaign finance laws designed to rein in corporate money and the influence of industry titans. But in about the last 50 years, the Supreme Court, in a series of decisions, has dismantled these common sense anti-corruption campaign finance laws that were designed to protect the people's voice in government. And it started with the 1976 case, Buckley versus Vallejo. And this is the case in which the court announced that money, political spending, is speech. And because we protect speech under the First Amendment, they decided that lawmakers no longer have the ability to place limits on spending to influence elections as long as the spending is independent of campaigns. Okay? But the court was wrong. Money isn't speech. Money is power. And when you give disproportionate political power to people just because they have more money, then you're undermining the whole idea of a representative system of government based on the idea of popular sovereignty. So, this crisis of money in politics, is this a reason for despair? Or is this a call to action, a call to citizenship? I believe it is the latter. And American Promise has a solution. The 4-Hour Freedom Amendment will restore the power of Americans to regulate election spending so that we can protect our freedom, have our voices heard, and participate as equal citizens in our government. Now, the constitutional amendment itself is very short. It's only 3 paragraphs. There is a difference between the constitutional amendment and legislation. This is not legislation. All we're doing is we are removing the obstacle that the court put in place when it decreed that political spending is protected speech. And this is how we do it. This is the operative language. Nothing in this Constitution shall be construed to forbid Congress or the states within their respective jurisdictions from reasonably regulating and limiting contributions and spending in campaigns, elections, or ballot measures. So once we remove the obstacle, then Congress can go to work setting the rules for spending pertaining to federal elections, and each state legislature can go to work to set the rules for spending pertaining to that state's elections. And the rules that Texas set are going to be different from the rules that California and New York set. It's fine. And Congress will set new rules pertaining to congressional and presidential races. Now, this amendment is supported by the overwhelming majority of Americans. This, again, is from the brand new polling that American Promise just published, showing that, let's see, what is that? 41, 70, about 78%, 77% of Americans either strongly or somewhat support a proposed constitutional amendment to allow states to reasonably regulate and limit money in our campaigns. But I've got some data that is specific to Texas. Now, I don't think it's going to surprise anyone here that, 76.7% of Texas Democrats support a constitutional amendment to fix money in politics, but this might surprise you that just about the same percentage of Texas Republicans agree. Yeah. And then independent voters, some slightly stronger support. This is not something that we need to fight about. We agree already about this. The American public is with us. So the advocacy challenge is to get lawmakers to change the rules of the game. And that's what American Promise is doing. We are mobilizing this supermajority support around the country to win a constitutional amendment. Now, this map tells you that so far 22 states have signaled to Congress that they want Congress to pass and send to the states for ratification a constitutional amendment. Some states have done this through votes at the ballot box, like Maine did in 2023. Other states have done it by passing resolutions through their state legislatures. The most recent action was the Pennsylvania House of Representatives passed a resolution with a bipartisan majority. The vote was 131 to 88 and is gone now to the Pennsylvania State Senate. So we're hoping that Pennsylvania is going to become the 23rd state to signal its readiness for a constitutional amendment. You probably know the process for winning a constitutional amendment is it has to pass out of both houses of Congress with a 2/3 majority, and then it goes down to the states. It has to be ratified by 3/4 of the states, or 38 states. So, what can you do? What can you do to help? This is our group of volunteers in Washington, D.C. on a very bright, sunny morning in June. We're shielding our eyes when we were told to smile for the camera because the sun was so bright. But there were a couple of hundred of us there going up to Capitol Hill for meetings. We do that every year. We also meet with legislators in districts. We do public speaking like this. Any connections you have to groups that would like to have a nonpartisan presentation about this, we would really appreciate a referral. Republican groups, Democratic groups, Rotary clubs, Lions clubs, any kind of community group. We're really grateful for the referrals. And then if you do nothing else, if you agree with us, we invite you to take the Citizen Pledge to demonstrate your support. You can use that QR code, or you can go to americanpromise.net/pledge and add your voice to those of other Americans calling for us to fix this fundamental problem. So that is all I have in prepared remarks. So now let's get to the really fun part. Give me your questions, your comments, your feedback.